The ashen rain fell softly that morning, coating the ruins of Glass Spine City in yet another layer of gray. Ulrich pulled his tattered respirator tighter across his face, the filters wheezing with each labored breath as he descended deeper into the subterranean remnants of what was once humanity's greatest achievement. 200 years after the Great Flesh Fire had swept across the planet, destroying civilization as it was known, these forgotten places still held secrets, and sometimes treasures. The beam from his makeshift headlamp cut through the darkness, illuminating crumbling walls etched with symbols no one alive could fully translate. Technology from the old world, dormant but not dead. Ulrich wasn't interested in understanding. He was interested in surviving. In this world, ancient artifacts fetched high prices from the scattered communities, trying to rebuild some semblance of society. 3 more levels down, he muttered to himself, consulting the faded map he'd bartered for at the last outpost. The trader had claimed these tunnels led to an untouched chamber, sealed since the cataclysm. Probably lies. But Ulrich had nothing to lose but time. The air grew colder as he descended, the walls transitioning from concrete to something older, more deliberate in its construction, stone, carved with flowing patterns that seemed to ripple in the dancing light of his lamp. Not random decay, but intentional design. He paused, running calloused fingers along the wall. "Unusual," he whispered, his voice echoing softly in the confined space. The patterns weren't chaotic like most ruins. They had rhythm, purpose, like the heartbeat of something sleeping. The tunnel widened suddenly into a vast chamber, and Ulrich's breath caught in his throat. Unlike the rest of the city, this place seemed untouched by time or destruction. Massive pillars rose to support a ceiling so high his light couldn't reach it. At the center stood a raised dais of polished stone, and embedded within it, a sword. Not just any sword. Even from a distance, Ulrich could see it was untarnished, its blade gleaming as if forged yesterday. The hilt was adorned with intricate designs that matched the patterns on the walls, culminating in a crystal pommel that caught his lamplight and scattered it across the chamber in prismatic bursts. "No way," he breathed, approaching cautiously. Artifacts in such pristine condition were rare, worth more than he could imagine. This could be the find that changed everything for him. No more scavenging. No more barely surviving from day to day. The sword was embedded in the stone dais, reminiscent of ancient legends his grandmother had told him as a child. Stories of chosen ones and destiny, fairy tales that had no place in this harsh reality. He circled it slowly, examining it from every angle. No obvious traps, no signs of alarm systems, just a perfect sword, waiting. Ulrich wasn't superstitious, but something about this place made the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. He reached out, his fingers hovering just above the hilt. The air around it seemed to hum with anticipation. "Just a sword," he told himself firmly. "Just metal and crystal." His fingers closed around the hilt. The world exploded. Light erupted from the sword, blinding in its intensity. The chamber shook violently, dust and small stones raining down from the ceiling. Ulrich tried to release his grip, but his hand seemed fused to the hilt, refusing to obey his panicked commands to let go. A voice, soft, distant, feminine, whispered inside his mind, "Give it back!" The words weren't spoken aloud but resonated within him, as if someone had plucked a string directly connected to his soul. With a final violent tremor, the sword came free, and Ulrich stumbled backward, clutching it to his chest. The light dimmed, but didn't disappear entirely, now contained within the crystal pommel, pulsing like a heartbeat. The tremors didn't stop. If anything, they intensified, spreading beyond the chamber. The entire underground complex groaned like a waking giant. From somewhere far above, Ulrich heard the distant sound of machinery activating, ancient systems stirring to life after centuries of dormancy. "What have I done?" he gasped, staring at the sword in his hands. The answer came in the form of footsteps, metallic, rhythmic, approaching. Alric swung his light toward the tunnel entrance just as the first of them appeared. Armored figures, their bodies a seamless blend of metal and something organic. Faces, hidden behind expressionless masks. The mechanized Guardian Corps, protectors of the old relics, enforcers of forgotten laws. They shouldn't exist anymore. They were supposed to have perished with the old world. One raised a gauntleted hand, pointing directly at Alric. "Surrender the Tide Shard," a voice commanded, distorted but unmistakably human beneath the mechanization. "You have awakened the ancient peril." Alric didn't wait to negotiate. Clutching the sword tightly, he bolted toward a smaller passage on the far side of the chamber, one barely visible in the shadows. The Guardians gave pursuit, their movements fluid despite their armored bulk. As he ran, the whisper came again, clearer this time. "Give it back. Find me." "I'm a little busy at the moment," Alric hissed through gritted teeth, ducking into a narrow crevice as energy bolts sizzled past him, striking the wall in a shower of sparks. The tunnels became a maze, and Alric thanked whatever luck he had left that he'd spent years memorizing the underground network of Glasspine City. He knew pathways the Guardians wouldn't, shortcuts, dead ends that weren't truly dead if you knew which stone to press. After what felt like hours of evasion, the mechanical footsteps faded into the distance. Alric collapsed against a wall, breathing heavily, the sword still clutched in his white-knuckled grip. Only now did he examine it properly. The blade was unlike any metal he'd ever seen, fluid, almost liquid in appearance though solid to the touch. Inscribed along its length were symbols similar to those on the chamber walls, but more refined, more deliberate. They seemed to shift subtly as he watched, rearranging themselves like living things. "What are you?" he whispered to the sword. No answer came this time, but the crystal pommel pulsed once, strongly, as if in response. Alric knew someone who might make sense of this, someone who devoted her life to understanding the world before the great flesh fire. Lysanne, the scholar who lived in the upper ruins, surrounded by salvaged books and artifacts, trading knowledge for supplies. Getting to her wouldn't be easy. The Guardians would be searching, and the tremors still hadn't stopped. If anything, they were growing stronger, more purposeful. Whatever system had awakened was still powering up, its effects spreading throughout the city. As Alric made his way cautiously upward, he noticed something else. The air was changing. The perpetual ashen quality that had defined the atmosphere for 2 centuries was shifting. In places, it seemed to clear momentarily, revealing glimpses of a sky Alric had never truly seen. Bluer, cleaner than the eternal gray he knew. These moments didn't last. The ash would swirl back, thicker than before. But that momentary clarity was unsettling. Nothing had changed the ash patterns since the cataclysm. Nothing could. Until now. Until the sword. 3 hours of careful navigation brought him to the surface, to a section of ruins close to Lysanne's tower. The city looked different somehow. The eternal twilight, caused by the ash-choked sky, was punctuated by beams of actual sunlight, breaking through in places, illuminating the ruins in golden shafts. More disturbing were the machines. Ancient maintenance units, dormant for centuries, now moved through the ruins with purpose, clearing debris, repairing structures, restoring systems long forgotten. The city was waking up. Alric kept to the shadows, avoiding both the machines and the increasingly frequent patrols of Guardians. The sword, now wrapped in cloth and strapped to his back, seemed to grow lighter with each step toward Lysanne's tower, as if approving of his destination. As he crept through a particularly exposed stretch of road, a flicker of movement caught his eye. A figure in white, ghostly in the swirling ash, watched him from atop a crumbling wall. A woman, her features indistinct but her posture regal, armored in what appeared to be white plates that gleamed despite the gloom. Ulrich blinked, and she was gone, if she had ever been there at all. The constant ash made visions common, the mind creating patterns from the swirling gray. Yet, something about this apparition felt different, more solid, more real. He finally reached the base of Lysan's tower as the sun was setting. Though it was hard to tell through the ash, the tremors had subsided temporarily, but the city hummed with awakened energy, lights flickering on in buildings that had been dark for centuries. Ulrich! Lysan greeted him without surprise when he climbed to her sanctuary at the tower's peak. I wondered when you'd arrive. She was older than Ulrich by at least 20 years. Her dark skin lined with age and knowledge. Her hair a cloud of white against her dark complexion. Her eyes, sharp and intelligent, immediately fixed on the wrapped bundle on his back. "You've found something significant," she stated. Not a question. "How did you know I was coming?" Ulrich asked, carefully unwrapping the sword and laying it on her table. Lysan gestured to the windows that surrounded her circular study. The city is waking up. The climate systems are reactivating. The ash is being processed again. Only one artifact could trigger such a response. Her eyes widened as the sword was revealed. The Tide Shard. The what? The royal blade of the Tide Kingdom, the civilization that built this city before it was called Glass Spine. Before the Great Flesh Fire. Lysan carefully avoided touching the sword, instead reaching for a magnifying glass to examine the inscriptions. Where did you find it? Ulrich described the underground chamber, the guardians, the voice in his head. Lysan listened intently, occasionally nodding as if he was confirming things she already knew. The Tide Kingdom was the pinnacle of harmony between technology and nature, she explained, tracing the air above the inscriptions without touching them. They created systems that worked with the environment rather than against it. This city was their crowning achievement, a self-sustaining ecosystem that could support millions while purifying the surrounding lands. What happened to them? Ulrich asked, though he already knew the answer. The Great Flesh Fire. But the legends suggest it wasn't just a natural disaster. Lysan's voice dropped to a whisper. It was deliberate, a last resort to prevent something worse. Worse than the end of civilization? Lysan didn't answer immediately. Instead, she began translating the inscriptions, muttering to herself as she worked. Blood of the Tide. Eternal Vigilance. The Sleeping Queen. She looked up sharply. Ulrich, this sword isn't just a symbol of power. It's a key to the Moon Tier Temple at the city's heart. The what? The central power source that regulated the city's climate systems. The legends say it contained the essence of the last Tide Princess, preserved in a state between life and death, waiting for the bloodline to return. Lysan's eyes gleamed with academic excitement. The sword is calling to her descendant. That's the voice you're hearing. Ulrich shook his head. I'm no descendant of royalty. I'm just a scavenger who was in the wrong place at the right time. Perhaps, Lysan conceded. Or perhaps the sword knows something you don't. Before Ulrich could respond, the tower shook violently. Outside, the sky darkened as the ash cloud thickened dramatically, swirling into a massive vortex above the city center. The system is destabilizing, Lysan said urgently. Without proper guidance, the awakened mechanisms are trying to purify 200 years of ash, all at once. It could create a pressure storm that would destroy what's left of the city. What do we do? Ulrich asked, already knowing and dreading the answer. The Moon Tier Temple. We need to reach it and either shut down the systems or... She hesitated. Or wake the princess fully, so she can control them. You're talking about reviving someone who's been dead for 2 centuries, Ulrich pointed out. Not dead. Suspended. There's a difference. Lysan was already gathering supplies into a bag. The Tide Kingdom had mastery over life and death that we still don't understand. If even half the legends are true, she's been waiting all this time. Ulrich reluctantly rewrapped the sword and secured it to his back. And if we wake her, she'll just take control of everything and save us all? Seems too easy. Nothing about this will be easy, Lysan replied grimly. The temple is at the city's heart, the most heavily guarded area, now that the systems are active again, and the Guardian Corps will be converging there too. Why would they try to stop us? Don't they want to save the city? The Guardians were programmed to preserve the status quo, to prevent interference with the sealed systems. Lysan shouldered her pack. They don't understand that circumstances have changed. They'll see us as threats, not saviors. They left the tower as the tremors intensified. The city was transforming around them. Buildings that had been dark for centuries now glowed with internal lights. Streets cleared themselves of debris as maintenance robots emerged from long-sealed compartments. And everywhere, the ash swirled in unnatural patterns, sometimes clearing completely to reveal stars before closing again like a suffocating blanket. Twice they had to hide from Guardian patrols, pressing themselves into shadows as the armored figures marched past with purpose. Once, Ulrich could have sworn he saw the white armored woman again, watching from a distance before dissolving into the ash. "Did you see that?" he whispered to Lysan. She squinted in the direction he pointed but shook her head. "The ash plays tricks on the eyes. Focus, Ulrich." They made their way steadily toward the city center, where a massive structure loomed against the turbulent sky. Unlike the other buildings, this one showed no signs of illumination or reactivation. It remained dark, dormant, waiting. "The Moon-Tear Temple," Lysan breathed, a note of reverence in her voice. "I never thought I'd see it with my own eyes." It didn't look like a temple to Ulrich. It resembled a massive seed, its outer shell composed of overlapping metallic petals that converged at the top in a tight spiral. No windows, no visible entrances, just the seamless shell, untouched by the centuries of decay that had claimed the rest of the city. "How do we get in?" he asked. In answer, the sword at his back pulsed with light, the glow visible even through its wrappings. The voice whispered again, clearer than ever. "Bring me home." Ulrich unwrapped the sword, and immediately the light intensified, projecting a beam toward a specific point on the temple's outer shell. As the light touched the metallic surface, a seam appeared, widening into an entrance just large enough for a person to slip through. "It recognizes the key," Lysan whispered. "We need to hurry. The Guardians will have detected the opening." They entered the temple, the opening sealing itself behind them. Inside was nothing like Ulrich had expected. Rather than technology or machinery, the vast circular chamber resembled a natural grotto. A pool of perfectly still water occupied the center, its surface reflective as a mirror, despite the lack of light. Surrounding the pool were crystalline formations that resembled trees, their branches extending toward the domed ceiling, where they converged in a complex lattice. "The Moon-Tear," Lysan said, pointing to the ceiling. Suspended at the center of the lattice was a single, massive crystal, teardrop in shape, faintly luminous with an inner blue light. The heart of the city's systems. The sword pulsed again, stronger, the light now synchronized with subtle ripples across the pool's surface. "What now?" Ulrich asked, his voice hushed in the sacred space. "The ritual," Lysan replied, moving to the pool's edge. "According to the legends, the sword must be returned to its rightful owner, placed in the waters of eternity, where the princess sleeps." Ulrich approached the pool cautiously, sword in hand. The voice was constant now, a gentle pressure in his mind, urging him forward. As he knelt by the water's edge, he saw his reflection, but it wasn't alone. Behind him stood the white armored woman, her features still indistinct, but her presence undeniable. He spun around, but there was no one there. Yet when he looked back at the reflection, she remained, watching him with eyes he couldn't see. "I don't understand what you want," he said to the apparition. "Give it back." The voice was no longer just in his head. It echoed softly through the chamber, emanating from the pool itself. "The incantation," Lysan urged, joining him at the poolside. "The words inscribed on the blade. Speak them." Alric looked down at the sword, where the shifting symbols had aligned into a clear sequence. He didn't know the language, yet somehow the meaning was clear to him. He spoke, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "Blood of the tide, guardian of the balance. I return what was taken. Wake from your slumber, last daughter of the sea, and reclaim your birthright." The sword began to vibrate in his hands, the crystal pommel glowing with increasing intensity. Alric felt a strange compulsion to raise it high, and then to plunge it into the still waters of the pool. The moment the blade touched the surface, the entire temple came alive. The crystalline trees blazed with light. The massive moon-tier crystal descended slowly from the ceiling, and the pool itself began to glow from within, illuminating a figure Alric hadn't been able to see before. A woman, suspended in the depths, encased in white armor that resembled the petals of some exotic flower. Her eyes were closed, her dark hair floating around her like seaweed, her expression peaceful in eternal slumber. As the sword entered the water, her eyes snapped open. They were blue, an impossible, luminous blue that no human Alric had ever seen possessed. They fixed on him with recognition, confusion, and then a flash of command. The water of the pool surged upward, enveloping the sword and pulling it from Alric's grasp. The liquid coalesced around the suspended woman, lifting her gently to the surface where she rose to her feet, water streaming from her armor in glittering rivulets. In her hand, she held the sword, which seemed to have become an extension of her being. She stepped onto the pool's edge, her movements fluid and graceful, despite 2 centuries of sleep. Her features were striking, high cheekbones, full lips, and those unnaturally blue eyes that seemed to see through Alric, rather than at him. She knelt before him, head bowed, the sword extended across her palms in a gesture of offering. When she spoke, her voice was the same that had whispered in his mind, but stronger, more present. "Give it back to me, heir of the tide. Return the power that is my burden to bear." Before Alric could respond, the temple shook violently. The entrance burst open, and Guardian Corps soldiers poured in, weapons raised. Behind them strode a figure taller than the rest, its armor more elaborate, face hidden behind a mask carved to resemble breaking waves. "Stand down, defilers," the leader commanded. "The awakening cannot proceed. The balance must be preserved." The princess rose smoothly to her feet, positioning herself between the guardians and Alric. "Your duty is to me, Commander, not to your misinterpreted protocols." "Princess Rainiel," the guardian leader's voice softened slightly. "The world has changed. The balance was broken. We sealed the systems to prevent further catastrophe, and in doing so, condemned the survivors to 2 centuries of struggle." Lysan interjected boldly. "The ash still falls. The land still suffers. Your preservation became stagnation." The Guardian turned its masked face toward her. "The alternative was extinction. The great flesh fire was merely contained, not extinguished. If the systems fully reactivate without proper calibration, it could reignite." Rainiel stepped forward, sword still in hand. "That is why I was preserved. To recalibrate, to adapt, to restore." She gestured to Alric. "And he has been chosen to assist me." "He is not of the bloodline," the Guardian insisted. "Our scans confirm it. He is merely a scavenger who stumbled upon the tide shard." "Yet the shard accepted him," Rainiel countered. "It guided him here. The old ways must evolve, Commander. The rigid bloodline protocols no longer serve our purpose." While they argued, Alric noticed the moon-tier crystal descending further, its blue light intensifying. The water in the pool began to churn, and the crystalline trees pulsed in a synchronized rhythm. The awakening process was continuing, despite the confrontation. "The system is rebalancing," Lysan whispered to him. "But without proper guidance, it could overcorrect. The artificial climate controls were designed for a world that no longer exists." The Guardian leader noticed too. With a gesture, half his forces moved to surround the pool, raising weapons that hummed with energy. "We cannot allow this," the commander stated firmly. "The protocols are clear." "Your protocols were written for a world that died," Rainiel replied, her voice rising. "I am the living protocol, Commander. I adapt. I evolve. That was always my purpose." She turned to Alric, extending the sword once more. "Take it. Complete the circuit. You awaken me. Now help me restore the balance properly." Alric hesitated, looking between the sword, the princess, and the armed guardians. "I don't understand what you're asking me to do." "Trust," she said simply. "Trust that the sword chose you for a reason." "Don't do it," the Guardian commander warned. "She has been isolated from reality for 2 centuries. Her judgment cannot be trusted." "And you've been blindly following outdated commands for just as long," Lysan countered. "At least she's willing to adapt." Outside, the storm intensified. Through the open entrance, Alric could see the ash cloud forming a perfect spiral above the temple, lightning crackling within its depths. The city's systems were approaching a critical point, awaiting direction. In that moment, Alric understood his role. He wasn't chosen because of bloodline or destiny. He was chosen because he was an outsider, someone who could see past the rigid traditions that had preserved the city in stasis, rather than allowing it to heal. He reached for the sword. The moment his fingers touched the hilt, a connection formed between him and Rainiel. Not romantic or even particularly personal, but functional. Through her, he could sense the vast network of systems that comprised the city's artificial ecosystem. Through him, she could sense the changed world, the adaptations humans had made to survive in the ash-choked wasteland. Together, they raised the sword. The Guardian Corps moved to intervene, but froze in place as the moon tear pulsed with blinding light. The crystal descended fully into the pool, merging with the waters, transforming them into a luminous blue liquid that began to flow outward in channels that had been dry for centuries. "The moon pool is restored," Rainiel said, her voice filled with wonder. "The balance can be re-established." Through their connection, Alric guided her understanding of what the world had become. The scattered communities, the harsh conditions, the adaptations people had made. In turn, she adjusted the awakening systems, tempering their aggressive purification protocols, establishing a gentler, more gradual healing process. The Guardian commander watched in silence as the temple transformed around them. The crystalline trees extended their branches, breaking through the temple walls to reach toward the sky. Where they emerged, the ash cloud began to dissipate, revealing patches of clear sky for the first time in living memory. "This is not protocol," the commander finally said, but the objection sounded hollow. "This is evolution," Rainiel replied. "The essence of the Tide Kingdom's philosophy that you forgot in your rigid preservation." She turned to Alric, their hands still joined on the sword's hilt. "The systems will need ongoing adjustment. A single correction isn't enough. The world has changed too much." "What are you suggesting?" Alric asked. "A new covenant," she said. "Not bound to a single bloodline or individual, but to the community. The sword, the key, should not belong to one ruler, but to those who understand the balance best." She released her grip on the hilt, leaving it entirely in Alric's hands. "Starting with you." "I'm not qualified for this," Alric protested. "I'm just a scavenger." "You're someone who survived in a broken world without losing your humanity," Lysan said quietly. "That's more qualification than any bloodline." Rainiel nodded in agreement. The power was never in the sword itself, but in the wisdom to use it properly. She turned to the Guardian commander. Your forces will adapt to a new purpose, not preservation, but guidance. Help the people understand the systems as they reawaken. Teach them to work with the technology, not fear it. For a long moment, the commander stood motionless. Then, slowly, he removed his mask, revealing a face that was partly mechanical, but with unmistakably human eyes. The protocols do allow for adaptation in extreme circumstances, he conceded. Perhaps 2 centuries of failure qualify. Outside, the transformation accelerated. The ash storm dissipated, revealing a sunset that painted the sky in colors most living humans had never seen. The crystalline growth spread throughout the city, following the network of channels that carried the luminous blue water from the moon pool. Where the water flowed, plants began to emerge from the ash-covered ground, not the stunted, gray vegetation of the wasteland, but vibrant green shoots that seemed to grow visibly with each passing moment. It will take time, Rainiel cautioned, watching the regrowth with a mixture of joy and sorrow. Decades, perhaps, for the land to fully heal, but the process has begun. What about you? Alric asked. After 2 centuries of sleep, Rainiel smiled faintly. My purpose was to bridge the gap between what was and what could be. Now that the bridge is forming, she looked down at her hands, which had begun to take on the same crystalline quality as the trees. I am becoming part of the system I was meant to restore. You're dying? Lysanne asked, alarmed. Transforming, Rainiel corrected. My consciousness will remain within the moon tear, guiding the systems. But this physical form was only meant to last until the restoration began. She placed a crystallizing hand on Alric's shoulder. That is why the sword, and the responsibility, must pass to the living. Over the following days, Glass Spine City, or Tide Kingdom as some began to call it again, underwent a metamorphosis. The Guardians, under their commander's new directive, assisted the scattered human communities in understanding and working with the reawakening technologies. Lysanne established a school in her tower, dedicated to preserving and interpreting the knowledge of the past. Alric found himself in an unexpected role, neither ruler nor guardian, but something in between. The sword remained with him, not as a symbol of authority, but as a tool of responsibility. With it, he could communicate with the essence of Rainiel that now permeated the moon tier, adjusting the restoration process as needed to serve the evolving community. The princess herself completed her transformation a week after her awakening. Standing at the center of the moon pool, her body gradually transmuted entirely into crystal, merging with the moon tear and the network it controlled. Her last words, spoken to Alric alone, were simple. Nothing is ever truly lost. It only changes form. The ash rains grew less frequent, then rare, then finally ceased altogether. The sky cleared to reveal stars that had been hidden for generations. Plants reclaimed the ruins, not destroying them, but incorporating them into a new kind of landscape, one where technology and nature existed in harmony, rather than opposition. 1 year after discovering the sword, Alric stood at the highest point of the city, watching children play in a garden that had been barren wasteland just months before. The sword hung at his side, a comfortable weight he had grown accustomed to. You could have kept it for yourself, Lysanne said, joining him at the overlook. Used its power differently. Most would have. Alric shook his head. It was never about possession. It was about restoration. He gazed out at the thriving community below. Besides, I'm not keeping it. I'm just its caretaker until someone better comes along. And how will you know who that is? She asked. Alric smiled, his hand resting lightly on the crystal pommel that still pulsed occasionally with gentle blue light. The sword will tell me. It always knew more than we did. In the heart of the city, the moon. Tear Temple had transformed into an open structure, its metallic petals fully bloomed to reveal the crystalline network within. At its center, the figure of Princess Rainiel, now entirely crystal, stood with arms outstretched, water flowing from her fingertips into channels that spread throughout the city and beyond, carrying life back into a world that had forgotten its taste. The Great Flesh Fire had ended civilization, but from its ashes, something new was growing, not a return to the past, but an evolution toward a future where the mistakes of both humans and their creations could perhaps be avoided through balance and adaptation. And at night, when Alric dreamed, he sometimes heard Rainiel's voice, not commanding now, but guiding, teaching, sharing the wisdom of a civilization that had almost been lost forever. The greatest power, she would say, is not in conquering or preserving, but in healing and growing. Remember that, caretaker of the tide. And each morning, he would wake and continue the work of restoration, one day at a time, as Glass Spine City bloomed around him like a flower that had waited 2 centuries to open its petals to the sun. The children of the city created a new legend, about a princess who slept in crystal, a scavenger who became a caretaker, and a sword that was really a key. They told it in whispers near the crystalline trees that grew throughout the ruins, believing that Rainiel could hear them through the network she had become. Perhaps she could, for sometimes, when the moon reflected in the waters of the channels, those who looked closely claimed they could see a woman in white armor walking among the crystalline growths, her hand outstretched, as if testing the balance of the world she had helped to restore. And always, she smiled. In the years that followed, other cities began their own awakening, drawn by rumors of clear skies and growing things. Pilgrims arrived seeking knowledge. Alric would greet them at the city's edge, the sword at his side, a beacon that called to those who sought healing, rather than power. There is no magic here, he would tell them. Only balance restored, only a world remembering how to breathe. Some believed him. Others created more elaborate myths about the Sword Princess and her champion. Alric stopped correcting them after a while. Myths, he realized, were just another kind of seed, planting ideas that would grow in their own way. And in the heart of the blooming city, the crystal form of Rainiel continued its silent vigil, neither truly alive nor dead, but existing in the balance between, just as the world itself balanced between its broken past and healing future. Sometimes, when the burden of responsibility grew heavy, Alric would visit her, placing his hand on the cool crystal of her outstretched palm. "I'm not sure I'm doing this right," he would confess. And though she never spoke aloud again, he would feel a gentle reassurance flow through their connection, a certainty that transcended words. There is no single right path, only balance, only growth, only the courage to let go of what was to embrace what could be. It was enough. It had to be. For in a world relearning how to live, sometimes the greatest wisdom was simply this: to trust that even from the ashes of catastrophe, new life would find a way to bloom. And it did.